Hello everyone and welcome to the final day of the Project Truth Homeshow. My name's Declan and today I'm joined by Thomas, who I think's on my left, and Joe, who's beneath the pair of us. And today we're going to be chatting about the man's role in the abortion debate. So I've had the pleasure of working on Project Truth with both these gentlemen multiple times in the past, and I think between the three of us, it must be at least about 1,000 abortion conversations we've had kind of cumulatively between us all. Thanks very much for joining us, guys.
Not at all. Pleasure to be here.
So today I'm kind of conscious of time. There's a lot of things that we could cover with this topic, but I'm going to cut straight to the chase and address the elephant in the room, if you will. So many people think that because as men, we can never become pregnant, we can never have to make an abortion decision firsthand, that we shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion at all on abortion. You know, we're all familiar with the gif on social media of Rachel from Friends wagging her finger, but it says no uterus, no opinion, you know. Is this something that you guys have came across talking about abortion, you know, on university or even in college at Project Truth?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. I think probably more for myself, more on Project Truth, that's where you kind of begin to see, a lot of that kind of rhetoric present. In university, I personally never really spoke about the topic too much because I know you have, in a lot of universities, you have a lot of pro-life student groups and things like that, whereas my university never really had anything like that, so the opportunity to speak about that never came about unless it was like you were at a party or something, or so there was never like a formal opportunity to speak about it. So I would say definitely more on Project Truth is where I've came across that kind of rhetoric.
Yeah, okay, cool. I don't know. Abortion isn't exactly the kind of ideal party chat, is it?
Yeah, no, definitely not.
Kills the mood a wee bit. So how does the conversation kind of tend to go then, Thomas? Like, is it an effective argument when it's levelled against you? Like, how do you respond to it?
Yeah, so I can first off see like why people would use it in terms of, well, you don't know how I felt. But then straight off the bat, you're kind of coming at it like determining or using emotion as the determining factor of whether something is right or wrong, which I disagree with. So although I might not know how someone felt in a certain situation, I can still look at it and judge whether it's morally right or morally wrong. So for example, if we take a look at slavery, like I've never been a slave myself, nor have I ever been a slave owner. I can still look at the topic of slavery and judge it morally as wrong. Like I disagree with that. And I think the same thing goes for abortion. I can still kind of look at it and say, although I don't know how a specific person felt if they were involved in that situation, I can still look at it and say that one, it's wrong, and two, I think there's better strategies to help women who find themselves in crisis pregnancies.
That's a really interesting way to kind of come at it. Like, if you think about it, Abraham Lincoln was white, so he had no idea what it was like to be a slave. He was still kind of like the one that was instrumental in bringing it down in the USA. But what if somebody comes back at you and says, I don't know, well, slavery and abortion are just two completely different things. Like, is there any way to respond to that criticism?
That's quite an interesting one. That Timothy Bram from the Equal Rights Institute, he wrote a blog about this, and he says that so that the slavery argument fits, but to try and make it even more relevant to abortion, he says that you can compare it to the situation of postnatal depression, which is where parents almost exclusively the mother, after the birth of her child, can end up horrendously depressed. And if it's untreated and not dealt with, then it can end up progressing to the stage where mothers have been known to kill their children, which is obviously a very, very extreme end point, but it does happen. It happened in the UK a few years ago, and the judge determined that the woman shouldn't go to prison because it was a psychiatric illness and she wasn't in her right mind. But I think that they use that as a good comparison, because you're saying that as a man, I don't know what it's like to fall pregnant. I'll never know what it's like to be in that scenario, and then to have your baby and to end up so horrendously depressed that you would go to the stage of killing your baby. But clearly I can say that that's definitively wrong, that that's definitely not a justifiable act. And that's maybe even more comparable to the abortion situation, because in that scenario, the judge determined that the woman wasn't responsible for her actions, and she wasn't necessarily doing something bad, or rather she wasn't being bad, but what she did was wrong.
Okay, and so a question for both of you. That is much more pertinent to the abortion debate, definitely. Like, how do people tend to respond if you use either one of those arguments? Do they tend to kind of like move over to your way of thinking, or do they press on with the fact that you shouldn't have an opinion after you've made this type of point?
Well, usually in my experience, sometimes it's been, like you said previously, those situations are completely different and you can't even begin to compare the two.
Yeah.
Whereas I would kind of say that you can, in that slavery was a thing where people saw slaves, or black people, to be less or not human.
Yeah.
Sorry, less than or not human. And it's kind of the same thing with abortion. It's like, well, we have rights over it because it's not human yet. So, which is I would say is wrong, because it's proven that from conception that is a unique life, with its own DNA. You know, you can determine like hair color, eye color, from the moment of conception. All the information is there. So I think you can compare the two in that the reason why they're taking place is because both black people and fetuses were, and so black people were and fetuses are now seen as less than human.
Yeah, of course, that's a really important commonality. But it's funny, Joe, I mean, people who tend to use this argument, they're not really against all men having a say in abortion, are they?
No. I mean, the classic one is if you're pro-choice, or your man who supports abortion, he's allowed to have that opinion. But it's the pro-life men who aren't. So I think that really clearly outlines the fact that usually, in my experience, it's not an intellectual challenge, it's a rhetorical one. So the idea is just to shut down debate, because it can be very difficult for men to respond to that without appearing as though they want to control women or something like that, which is why we were obviously discussing those other arguments earlier on. You need to establish that despite the fact that you might be outside the circle of people who can fall pregnant and have babies, you can still have an opinion on what is a major moral issue of the day.
Yeah, of course, nobody wants to, if you're not used to having this sort of a conversation, and somebody starts labeling you as an oppressive man or whatever, like, quite understandably, you can be taken aback by that and kind of maybe hesitant about continuing in a conversation. But kind of another underlying thing that I wanted to bring up is that it kind of, the usage of this argument kind of shows that people are thinking that the only people who abortion can be tough on are women. But Joe, you had a story that kind of indicated the contrary, didn't you?
Yeah, in Project Truth a couple of years ago, in one of the cities, we had the stall set up, and the guy approached the stall. I didn't approach him.
Yep.
And he came up and he was chatting about the different issues and all the rest of it, and he just came out. He just came up and said that years ago he lived in London when he was in his 20s, and that his girlfriend had fallen pregnant and got an abortion, and didn't tell him any of this until after. So he didn't even know that the woman was pregnant. And then at that point in the conversation, you could just see that he was, that this was an awful thing. He said that he really had he been told, he would have tried to persuade her not to go through with the abortion. And you could see the regret in the guy's face. The guy was in his 50s or 60s, so we're talking 2-3 decades later.
Wow.
And after that, he just he didn't really want to talk. He didn't want to take a leaflet, and he just kind of headed off. And the last thing he said before heading off, as he was walking away, he just said, "Oh, but it was her body, it was her choice, wasn't it? It wasn't really for me to say." And I think that really cuts to the core of it, the fact that this man isn't even allowed to grieve his own child. Never mind have an opinion.
And it's caused, that's the thing, it's clearly caused that gentleman, like, as you say, decades of emotional anguish. So, I mean, to kind of, it just seems unfair that he's not allowed an opinion on the issue and he's been such a victim of it,
Definitely. I think it's a shame as well because from what I've heard, I know that when a woman tells her partner that she is pregnant, the support and the encouragement from the man really puts her at ease as well. So then to kind of take the option away of him being able to provide that, it's just going to make things like a whole lot more hard. And I think it's a shame that the guy didn't kind of get the chance to offer that and to offer his help and kind of leadership, if you will, in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up, as a lot of people view men's role in an abortion decision as being one of potential coercion to have a baby, if you like. I think a lot of people think that if you give man an option, then he might force a woman to carry a baby, instead of realising that what he might actually do is offer to help, which in a lot of people's situation might be what they want to hear. But if you're not allowed to say anything, then you won't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's kind of related to, I think the last thing that I wanted to draw on in relation to this is that it was Joe again, you had mentioned to me that there was another consequence of this type of argument for men. Could you tell the guys at home and myself and Thomas again what you meant?
So I suppose that the story that I just said obviously brings up the idea that man wasn't allowed to grieve his child, and there's that perspective where the man's not involved. But I suppose the flip side that me and Declan were discussing was the idea that it also allows men to abstain from any responsibility. And I think people often don't consider that a man can then just sleep about, if you like, and that's it. He doesn't have any more involvement at all. Everything's pushed onto the woman. She can choose to keep or get rid of the child, and he doesn't have to worry about it. And I think that really feeds into that kind of culture.
Yeah, I think as well, it's like, on one hand, it's allowing the men to avoid responsibility, and then on the other hand, it's putting a lot of pressure on the woman who's found herself in this situation, because especially if the people around her, including her friends and her family, if they're not providing that support, then literally the only avenue of support that she's got is her partner. And if he's there just saying, well, you know what, it's your choice, I'll be there no matter what you do, it's like, well, that's great, but it's not really much help.
Yes, that's really interesting.
Help me make it. I want you to tell me to keep this baby, but I feel like you don't want it because you're just saying it's up to me, kind of thing. You're not being very enthusiastic.
It's
so
quite subtle in that it seems like it seems like you're saying something super empowering, like, oh yeah, it's your, but it's your choice completely. But you're actually in quite a clear way. You're kind of leaving it high and dry as well by totally abdicating yourself.
Yeah, it's just a massive miscommunication.
Yeah,
because like you said, the guy probably feels like he's empowering her to make her own decision because that's what he thinks that she wants, because I don't know, maybe society has told him that way, like that female empowerment is the thing, and like you need to let her make her own decisions and stuff, whereas she is not appreciating it because she needs him to step up for her and help her with their child, because at the end of the day, it takes two to tango. That is their child together.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a really, really important point. So, what then can men do to take responsibility for their place in the abortion debate?
Yeah. So I think that well, for starters, if men find themselves in these situations where they've gotten a girl pregnant and the girl comes to them asking, what should I do? Or even just tells them, look, I'm pregnant. The first thing you should always do is listen to what she has to say, because she's probably got a lot of pent up feelings and thoughts racing around in her head. So I think the first thing you need to do is just listen to her and then make her feel completely at ease by offering encouragement and support, and not just saying, like, whatever you want to do, I will be there, but saying, no, let's keep this baby, we can do this, I'll support you, and we can come up with a plan and make it work. Like, really put the emphasis on the fact that it's a joy and a blessing that a new life has been has came into the world, and not seeing it as a problem that needs to be fixed. I always kind of go back to that idea of it's how you view the situation, it's how you view the baby itself. The baby is not a problem to be fixed. It's a blessing that needs to be cherished the right way. So
okay, yeah, that's really, really well put. I think also kind of that's excellent advice for if your girlfriend happens to, if you're in that situation, your girlfriend happens to be pregnant. That's excellent advice from yourself there, Thomas. But I think more generally speaking, like what I would say to add to that would be, like, don't be afraid to speak up. Like, if you look back through the things that yourself, Joe, and Thomas have offered today, like the arguments that we've used here today, like they're quite robust, and they kind of work really well against that card of you're a man, therefore you can't have an opinion. So, like, if you want to rewind back the video a little bit, look at the arguments again, or even look online, you'll find them expressed much more articulately than we have done today. Just look them up and don't be afraid to speak up if the topic comes up. So I think that's all that we needed to cover. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. I don't know, I think we've had a little bit of a delay there, a little bit of a cutout, but thank you very much for joining me, gents. It's been a pleasure to talk to you about the men's role in the pro-life movement, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the home show. Bye for now.
Thank you, guys.